Hello and welcome to Breath 101. I wanted to put together a short and hopefully informative video to get across the principles of how we breathe, how it can affect us both positively and negatively in a simple and understandable way. I've spent the last 4 or 5 years studying breath work and its benefits and its pitfalls. There's an awful lot of science to it and there's still a lot I have to learn. But the very basics, the principles, if you understand them, then they can make a hugely beneficial impact into your day-to-day life, how you're feeling, your emotional intelligence, and also your performance. So starting off, I really like this quote from a guy called BKS Iyengar, who was responsible for bringing yoga to the Western world. And a lot of people put yoga and breathing together because it's the oldest movement practice that we know of that humans have done, anything from 5,000 to 7,000 years old. And at the very start of yoga, breath was the practice and then the movement followed. Whereas now modern yoga is a little bit different to the way yoga was originally designed. People now go to yoga for flexibility, mostly. There are still some practitioners who focus on the breath first and then the movement follows. But this quote basically says it all in a sentence. This is part of the quote, that the mind is the king of the senses and the breath is the king of the mind. Okay, so if you can take control of your breathing, that simple sentence explains almost the power that the breathing can have. So hopefully the slides I'm going to show you and the information I'm going to give you is going to open some questions for you and give you some stuff to practice at home too. So starting off with this, which of these do you think is the most important? We spend an awful lot of time talking about food, about nutrition, about supplements, and which supplement should I take for this, and should I eat more protein, and which diet should I do? Water is pretty obvious. We know that if we don't drink enough water, we start feeling like we get headaches, we feel lethargic, we just don't feel right. But how often do we actually, up until quite recently, do we actually talk about the air, the oxygen that we're breathing? So when it comes to food, we can survive for roughly around 3 weeks. Again, this is general. Someone might last a bit longer, someone else not quite so long, depending on their general health. So when it comes to water, we're talking about 3 days with no water at all. We can survive, again, some of us a little bit longer, some of us not so long. But when it comes to air, oxygen, breathing, how long can we last? So it's roughly about 3 minutes. So if we stop breathing, it's roughly around 3 minutes before we're risking death or be hugely negatively affected from the lack of oxygen. So just think of which of those three we talk about the most, which we talk about the least. So really, this should be flipped around. We should be talking about air, oxygen, breathing first, and everything else should follow that. So why do we need to pay attention to how we breathe? It's an autonomic action. You shouldn't have to think about your breathing every second of every day, because that would be absolutely exhausting. I know I couldn't do that. But you do want to pay attention occasionally, how you're breathing, how you're feeling, being able to check in with yourself at any given time just to notice, and then over time that autonomic response to whatever's happening to you should be a better, more efficient response. Think of breathing as the three principles I like to use for breathing. And our body is always looking for balance, for homeostasis. So if we can use our breathing to balance out the gases so that our body can utilize the energy better, then the way we think and the way we behave and the way we act will more than likely improve. Our movement quality will improve, because every single tissue and every single organ in our body requires oxygen for energy. If we can make our body more aerobically oxygen efficient, then the tissues, the organs are all just going to work a hell of a lot better, rather than getting stiff and tight and just not working as well. And that crosses over to our metabolism, our physiology, how our body works. If we can make our entire body more efficient at using oxygen, then our organs are also going to work so much better. And when they work better, we generally feel better. So think about our breathing as a remote control, as if you're pointing a remote control at your TV and you can control which station you look at. You can turn the volume up, you can turn the volume down. Think of the breathing as the same for our nervous system. Our autonomic nervous system has two main parts. It does have a third called the enteric, but we're not going to talk about that today. This is mainly about the two other parts of our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, our sympathetic and our parasympathetic. So think of our autonomic nervous system, these two parts, as a volume dial. Okay, we're never really stuck on one side or stuck on the other side. We drift from one to the other constantly throughout the day. So our sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight response, which is our response or reaction to danger or stress, that's the one that kind of gets our heart rate racing and gets our blood pumping and our breathing a bit more labored. And then the opposite of that, our parasympathetic, our rest and digest and recovery stage. Think about when you're sleeping, when you're calm, when you're relaxed, when you're creative. That's where we want to sit most of the time throughout the day. And our sympathetic should be our reaction to something that happens to us. So the sympathetic nervous system, our fight-flight response, this prepares our body for stress or for danger. And like I said there, it activates the fight or flight response to whatever's happening in front of us. It increases our heart rate, it increases our blood pressure so that our blood can pump all that blood to our extremities, our hands and our feet to either run or fight. And it can have negative effects on our health if it's activated for too long. And think about our modern living is everything now is 100 miles an hour. We're switched on 24 hours a day. We've got these on us constantly, so we know that we can look at whatever we want, we can buy whatever we want, we can watch whatever we want, and we never really turn off. So the parasympathetic or rest and digest is going to be the opposite of that. So this is responsible for our rest and digest and recovery state. This promotes relaxation mentally and physically, reduces our heart rate, reduces our blood pressure, and our breathing rate, also helps us digest food. And then the positive effects on this and our well-being, if we're activated regularly and sit in this position for most of the time, will have a hugely positive benefit on most of us. If you're performing an activity, what's recorded or known as the flow state, which is your balance between the two. If you've ever been in a situation where you're performing an activity and 2 hours have gone without you even looking at the clock and you can't believe that the time's gone so quickly, that's the flow state. It's quite difficult to get into and it's quite difficult to stay in. You usually drift in and out of it. But if you have an activity that you love to do and you find yourself doing that, then that is when you're sitting in your flow state. So what the breathing will do will help us stay in one more than the other or drift from one to the other at will rather than just what feels like a random response to just anything that's happening to us. So this is where our breathing becomes that remote control and you can decide which of those states you want to be in at any time. So how do we do that? Generally, breathing through our mouth is more biased towards the sympathetic. So just start paying a bit of attention to how you're breathing. If you notice you breathe through your mouth most of the time, then you're more than likely going to be in a more sympathetic tone and you're probably going to be a bit more reactive to things that happen to you. If you breathe through your nose, that generally biases our parasympathetic. So that is the one that gives us that calm, rest and digest and relaxed state. So here's a good example of how that system actually works. Think, everyone's seen this on TV, the cheetah is chasing the antelope. The cheetah's hungry. The antelope does not want to get eaten. Not today anyway, not if it can help it. So do you think there is a physiological difference between those two animals? As in their heart rate, their blood pressure, what we just talked about? The answer to that is no. Stress physiology doesn't differentiate between species. The stress response is the stress response, regardless of the species. That's got dilated pupils to focus, elevated heart rate to pump the blood to the legs so that it can run as fast as it can to try and catch the antelope. The antelope, it wants the opposite, but the stress response is exactly the same. Its pupils are dilating because it's trying to focus on a point to get away from. Its blood is pumping to get the blood to its extremities so it can get away from the cheetah. So there is no physiological difference. The only difference is the cheetah wants to be there to eat, and the antelope doesn't, because it doesn't want to get eaten. So there is no physiological difference. The only difference really is emotional difference. Now, think of us, think of humans if we were in that situation. What would you do if you were the antelope? Would you do what the antelope does? And if it doesn't get eaten or doesn't get caught and eaten, it wanders back to its herd and within minutes, it's back to eating the grass as if nothing had ever happened. The cheetah will walk back, find some shade, chill out, relax until the next antelope comes within distance, and off it goes again. And this repeats over and over again. What would we do in that situation? If we had just been chased by a cheetah and not caught, would we just go back to our everyday life and not think anything about it? Or would we pick up this, go straight onto social media, tell the world that we were nearly killed and eaten by a cheetah, oh my God, and run it through our brains over and over and over again? We basically relive the same thing over and over again. So where do we start with the breathing? How can we start controlling our breathing? First thing you can do is start paying attention. When you're sitting down at home, watching TV, just pay attention to how you're breathing. Is it through the nose? Is it through the mouth? Is it shallow? Is it deep? Roughly how many breaths a minute are you doing? Don't focus too much on it. All you're doing at the minute, you're not counting anything or taking scores. You're just paying attention. Doing things like hand on the chest, hand on the stomach. Which hand moves first? Or do both hands move, or does only one hand move? Putting your hands outside your rib cage. Do they move that way? What happens when you're breathing in your day-to-day breath? The next thing you can start doing is just breathe more through the nose and less through the mouth. Very simple. Like we said, nose breathing biases that sympathetic state, that rest or digest state, and mouth breathing biases the sympathetic state. So straight away, by just changing how you breathe, because the nose is designed to breathe through, the mouth is purely a backup system. We can breathe through the mouth, and we should in certain instances breathe through the mouth, but most of the time this is designed exactly for breathing. The mouth really is designed for talking and eating. The fact that we can breathe in air quickly and breathe out air quickly is a backup. So we want to talk briefly about carbon dioxide. We always talk about oxygen, we need more oxygen to breathe, but what about carbon dioxide? How important is it? There's an assessment you can do twice a day, which is going to help massively with your breathing and understanding the benefit of carbon dioxide. The main reason the carbon dioxide is so important, because without carbon dioxide in our system, our body cannot utilize the oxygen that we breathe in. There's something called the Bohr effect, which I won't go into too much detail here. We're going to talk about a little bit later. But without that carbon dioxide in your system, your body cannot utilize the oxygen. So the test or the assessment that we're going to do here is called the CO2 tolerance assessment, which is basically a max exhale test. This is something you can start doing straight away. This is done with 4 breaths, all through the nose. The first 3 are just going to be regular, relaxed, in through the nose, out through the nose. And then on the 4th one, you inhale as long and as deep as you can. And then you set a timer and exhale as slowly as you can. And you time the exhale. With that exhale, as soon as you feel the urge to breathe or swallow or cough or anything like that, then it stops. I want to make clear, however, don't treat this like a competition. You're not trying to beat your score. You just go with it, and whatever you get on the day, on that time on the day, that's the time you get. The times will change and will fluctuate because it will go by how stressed you are. So an example of how this would work, you get a timer on your phone. So you will breathe in 3 times. Then on the 4th, set the timer, and exhale like that for as long as possible. Don't watch the timer, just hover your finger over the button and then stop, and that will give you a number. What I want you to do is do that for 30 days. Once in the morning, once in the evening. Ideally at the same time. So just after you wake up is great, before you get out of bed, and then just before you go to sleep or go to bed is another time. Keep a note of the scores, and then keep an eye, and you'll start to see a pattern emerge. Basically, the lower the score, the more we can do to help. I like to use this next example of all the workshops and seminars that I do. This is 1 month of my mother doing the CO2 tolerance assessment twice a day. This is February 2021. It's on my Instagram page where I posted it as we did it. She was her blood pressure was getting a little bit high. She was advised by the doctor to get a blood pressure monitor and do some daily readings over a month, and then go back to see the GP just again to see if we've got a pattern and see whether her blood pressure changes over that month. So I thought, great, this is an opportunity now for us to do some really simple things just to see if we can help without changing anything else. We didn't change her diet, we didn't change her activity levels. All we did was get her to do the CO2 tolerance test twice a day and breathe her nose a bit more during the day. These are the numbers. So on the 1st of February, she was 155/89, and her CO2 tolerance assessment score was 13 seconds. Then on the 28th of February, the end of the month, her blood pressure had gone down to 139/78, and her CO2 tolerance assessment had gone up to 31 seconds. Obviously, this is just an N=1 experiment with one person, but I would say the only thing we changed through that month was paying attention to her breathing and doing the tolerance test. The reason the blood pressure probably went down is when you build up your tolerance to carbon dioxide, it actually is a vasodilator of your blood vessels, which means it opens them up. So by proxy, if those blood vessels open slightly, then the pressure is going to be less, so the pressure is going to drop. So in my opinion, that is more than likely why those numbers went down. So what that meant was she didn't have to go on statins, she didn't have to go on any potential medication. She can now manage that through her breathing. Finishing up, there's a lot of information out there about breathing. There's a load of methods. I would say at this point, if you're new to this, completely ignore any methods unless you really want to try them. But I would say start with all the things I've just gone through and start with this book by James Nestor. It's a fantastic book. If you get the audio book, he also reads it, and it's a fantastic story of how he stumbled onto breath work, all the things he's done over the last 10 years, and the benefits he's found. It gives you a huge insight into the potential of breathing without focusing too much on any individual method. It's a great book, it's a great read, and I guarantee if you get that book, you will read it more than once. If you wanted any more information, then you can contact me through my email, coachdanoutcast@gmail.com. I'm on Instagram at the Anti-Fragile Movement, so feel free to send me a message and I will send you in the right direction of any more information. But I'm also running a 6-week course which will be go into much more detail, the things we've briefly gone through here. They're all done through Zoom, and each week we build on the previous week. You'll have homework to do. So by the end of the 6 weeks, you will have a much, much deeper understanding of how you can breathe to make your life better, be that improve performance, be that reduce anxiety and stress, be that improve your reactivity to things and become more responsive and less reactive, and just promote a general feeling of health, contentment and well-being. That's what I've seen in myself over the last 5 years, huge changes for the better. And I think this stuff is too important and too simple not to share with people. So hopefully this short presentation has made you a little bit more interested in the potential and possibility of what you can do yourself with your breathing. I just feel this stuff is too important not to share. So thank you for your attention. Hopefully you got something out of this. So thank you for your attention, and hopefully the information I've given you here might have planted some seeds for you to move forward and start paying a bit more attention to your breathing and looking into a little bit more and seeing how it could help you and your life.